The November wind cut through Montana like a blade made of ice and regret. Lucas Garrett gripped the steering wheel of his F-150 with hands that had once steadied rifles in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. Now those same hands just tried to hold steady against the memories that wouldn't stop coming. 43 years old, 14 years in the Navy, 8 months since he'd walked away from the only life he'd ever known how to live. The road stretched ahead like a ribbon of cracked asphalt threading through wilderness that didn't care about his past. Dense pine forests crowded both sides, their branches heavy with early snow. The kind of empty that looked peaceful in photographs, but felt suffocating when you were running from yourself. In the passenger seat, Ranger sat with the perfect stillness of a weapon at rest. 7 years old, German Shepherd. Black and tan coat that caught the afternoon light filtering through the windshield. The scar beneath his left ear was a pale line where shrapnel had carved away fur and flesh in Syrium, the same mission that had ended both their careers in blood and fire, and the kind of screaming that echoed in dreams. Ranger's eyes tracked the landscape with methodical precision. Not nervous, not excited, just aware. That was the difference between a pet and a partner who'd been trained to find explosives in the dark while mortars turned the night into fire. Lucas had bought 40 acres sight unseen, a realtor's listing filled with words like secluded in pristine wilderness and perfect for someone seeking solitude. What the listing really meant far enough from civilization that nobody would ask questions about the man who wanted to disappear. The GPS announced their arrival in a voice too cheerful for the weight Lucas carried. Millbrook, Montana, population 2,800, one main street, 3 churches, a diner that had probably looked exactly the same since 1974. Lucas pulled into the gravel lot of Marlene's place, a converted railroad car that someone had welded to a foundation and called a restaurant. The sign above the door showed a steaming coffee cup painted by someone who understood that perfection wasn't the point, warmth was. He sat in the truck for a moment, hands still on the wheel. Through the fogged windows, he could see people inside. Normal people. People whose biggest decision today was probably whether to order the meatloaf or the chicken fried steak. People who hadn't watched their teammates bleed out in the sand because someone had made a call and that someone had been him. Colin Martinez. Their names were carved into his chest deeper than any tattoo. 2 men with families who would spend every Thanksgiving and Christmas and birthday with empty chairs at the table because Lucas Garrett had trusted intelligence that turned out to be 3 days old and fatally wrong. "Come on, boy." Ranger was already moving before Lucas finished speaking, dropping from the truck with the economical grace of an athlete who never wasted energy. The dog positioned himself at Lucas's left side automatically, not heeling like a show dog working, scanning, assessing threat levels in a Montana diner parking lot the same way he'd assess them in villages where every doorway could hide death. The bell above the door chimed as they entered. Conversations didn't stop, but they stuttered. Eyes tracked the man in the olive field. Jacket worn soft at the elbows, the flannel shirt in red and black that had seen better years, the military posture that couldn't be trained away, even when everything else had been stripped down to nothing. Lucas chose a booth in the back corner. Ranger settled beneath the table without being told, his body angled outward, placing himself between Lucas and the rest of the diner. Even in retirement, some instincts ran too deep to question. A woman approached with a coffee pot and a face that had weathered 70-plus years into something kind. Her name tag read Marlene in fading script. Gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. Eyes that had seen enough of life to recognize when someone was carrying more than they could hold. "Coffee, hon, please." She poured without ceremony, the stream of dark liquid hitting the cup with the sound of something dependable in a world that wasn't. "You military was. And thank you for your service." The words were automatic, but she meant them. He could tell the difference. 43 years of reading people's eyes, of knowing when someone was lying before they finished the sentence. Somewhere to be for Thanksgiving next week. Lucas looked out the window at the snow starting to fall. "Working on it." Marlene nodded like she understood the difference between having a destination and having somewhere that wanted you there. "Burger's good, so's the pie. Coffee's unlimited and strong enough to keep you awake till next Tuesday." "Burger," and he glanced down at Ranger. "You mind? For the dog? Honey, I've been feeding strays and soldiers for 40 years. I'll bring him something proper." She left before Lucas could clarify that Ranger wasn't a stray, wasn't a pet, wasn't anything except the only living creature who'd been with him through the worst of it and never asked him to explain. The door chimed again. Lucas's eyes tracked the movement instinctively. Not threat assessment anymore, just habit. What he saw made him straighten slightly despite himself. A woman in a wheelchair pushed through the entrance snow, dusting her auburn hair like early frost. Late 20s, maybe 30. The kind of face that had once smiled easily, but had forgotten how somewhere along the way. She navigated her chair with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd had years to perfect the movements, who'd long since stopped expecting the world to be accessible and had learned to make it work anyway. Behind her came a German shepherd, older, the gray spreading across his muzzle like ash from a fire that had burned too long. He moved with the careful deliberation of arthritic joints of a body that had given everything it had and was running on fumes and loyalty now. The dog saw Ranger immediately. Their eyes met across the diner in the way that dogs communicate when they recognize something in each other. Not aggression, not submission, just acknowledgement. Two warriors from different wars finding each other in the space between combat and whatever came after. The woman navigated her chair to a booth near the window. The old shepherd positioned himself beside her with practiced precision. Not trained in the military sense, Lucas could tell the difference. This was devotion. This was a dog who had chosen someone and decided that protecting her was the only mission that mattered. Evening, Grace. Marlene's voice had softened in a way it hadn't for Lucas. The kind of gentle that people reserved for someone they'd watched suffer and couldn't quite protect. Hi, Marlene. Just picking up Judah's medication. Dr. Hendrick said it would be ready by 6. Should be any minute now. You want coffee while you wait. That would be wonderful. Lucas watched without watching, a skill 14 years of covert operations had perfected, appearing disinterested while cataloging every detail. The woman Grace held herself with quiet dignity despite the wheelchair. No self-pity in her posture, no bitterness in her voice. Just the steady endurance of someone who'd learned to carry weight without complaint, who'd had enough taken from her that she'd stopped expecting life to be fair and had learned to be strong instead. The dog Judah never took his eyes off her, even sitting his body angled outward, placing himself between Grace and the rest of the diner. Between Grace and a world that had already proven it could hurt her. Lucas recognized that positioning. He'd trained dogs who did the same thing. But this wasn't training. This was love made manifest in fur and teeth, and the absolute refusal to let anything else take what mattered. Ranger shifted beneath the table. His ears pricked at the whisper of Lucas's breath, forming the dog's name barely audible. Easy. The dog settled deeper, but his eyes remained on the other shepherd. Curious, respectful, measuring worth the way warriors always did when they met someone who'd earned their scars honestly. Marlene brought the burger and set a plate beside Lucas's boot. Ground beef plain, no bun, no condiments. Proper fuel for a working dog. Ranger sniffed the meat. His nose twitched. He looked at the plate, then up at Lucas, then back at the plate. Then the dog turned his head away with the kind of dignified refusal that spoke volumes about standards and expectations and the fact that even retirement didn't mean accepting garbage. Lucas felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Not quite a smile. Not yet, but close. Marlene caught it from across the diner and grinned. Your dog's got better taste than most men I've known. He's particular. Particular, Marlene laughed. That's one word for it. Tell you what, let me get him something from the back. Real meat, not that frozen stuff. She disappeared into the kitchen, and Lucas found himself almost smiling. Almost. The bell chimed again. Lucas felt the shift before he saw it. The air in the diner changed the way air changed when something dangerous walked into a room. Pressure dropping, tension rising. The way it always did when trouble came through a door, wearing a familiar face. The man who entered was early 30s, handsome in a desperate way. The kind of good looks that had probably opened doors when he was younger, but had started to curdle with whatever weight he carried now. His hair was dark, pushed back carelessly. His coat had once been expensive, but now showed signs of neglect. Coffee stains on the cuff, a button missing the hem, starting to fray. His eyes held the restless energy of someone running from something that was gaining ground. Grace's reaction was immediate and visceral. Her spine stiffened. Her hands clenched on the armrests of her chair, hard enough that her knuckles went white. Judah rose slowly to his feet, a low growl building in his throat like distant thunder, promising a storm. There you are. The man's smile was too wide, too bright. The smile of someone trying to convince himself, as much as everyone else, that everything was fine, that the walls weren't closing in, that the water wasn't rising past his chin. Lyle, Grace's voice was flat. All the warmth she'd shown Marlene had drained away, replaced with something cold and careful. What are you doing here? Can a brother check on his sister? Lyle moved toward her booth, ignoring the growling dog with the kind of confidence that came from a lifetime of dismissing warnings until they became disasters, especially when she won't return my calls. I've been busy, too busy for family. He slid into the booth across from her without invitation, without permission, without any of the courtesy that should exist between siblings who actually cared about each other. That hurts, Grace. That really hurts. Lucas watched Judah's hackles rise. The old dog's eyes never left Lyle, tracking every movement with predatory focus. This was a boy who'd made a decision about this man a long time ago and was just waiting for permission to enforce that judgment. What do you want, Lyle? I want to talk about the property, about Mom and Dad's wishes. We've talked. The answer is still no. Grace. Lyle leaned forward, voice dropping to something that might have been concern, but felt more like threat. I'm trying to help you here. The market is good right now. We could split the proceeds. The house isn't for sale. It should be. His voice hardened, frustration bleeding through the veneer of brotherly concern. You can't maintain a property like that on your own, not in your condition. Lucas saw Grace flinch, saw the old wound reopened with surgical precision, the casual cruelty of someone who knew exactly where to cut to make it hurt the most. I'm managing fine. Are you? Because that's not what I hear. I hear the roof needs work, the furnace is dying. Judah's vet bills are piling up. Lyle's voice took on an edge sharp enough to draw blood. I hear you're barely scraping by, Gracie. That's none of your business. It's absolutely my business. I'm your brother. I'm trying to protect you. He reached across the table and grabbed Grace's wrist. Not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough to control. Mom and Dad wouldn't want you struggling like this. They would want, let go of me. Just listen. I said let go. Judah's growl erupted into a bark that shattered the quiet of the diner like a gunshot. The old dog lunged forward, teeth snapping inches from Lyle's hand, close enough that Lyle could feel the heat of the dog's breath, close enough to know that the only thing keeping those teeth from connecting was the choice of the animal making the threat. Lyle jerked back, releasing Grace's wrist like he'd been burned. Control your damn dog. He's doing exactly what he's supposed to do. That mutt is a menace. One of these days, someone's going to put him down. Get out, Lyle. This isn't over, Grace. Lyle stood, straightening his coat with hands that trembled just slightly. I'll come by the house tonight. We can talk properly, without the audience. His eyes swept the diner, landing briefly on Lucas. For a moment, their gazes locked. Lyle saw what everyone eventually saw in Lucas's eyes, the cold assessment of someone who'd been trained to identify threats and eliminate them, who'd done it enough times that it had stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like reflex. Lyle looked away first. Without distractions, he finished and walked out without another word. The silence he left behind was heavy, suffocating. The kind of silence that made people pretend to be very interested in their coffee while they tried not to acknowledge what they'd just witnessed. Grace sat motionless, her hand trembling where Lyle had grabbed her wrist. A red mark was already forming, the ghost of fingers pressed too hard into skin that would bruise by morning. Judah pressed against her leg, whimpering softly. All his earlier aggression had transformed into anxious concern. He licked her hand once, twice, desperate to erase the touch of the man who'd hurt her. Lucas counted to 10, then to 20, waiting to see if she'd be okay. She wasn't. Tears began sliding down her face. Silent, controlled. The tears of someone who'd learned to cry without making sound, who'd had to grieve in the cracks between other people's comfort because nobody wanted to sit with real pain. Lucas was moving before he made the conscious decision. Ranger rose and followed, falling into step with the automatic precision of a partner who'd learned to anticipate need. Miss? Grace looked up, startled. She wiped her eyes quickly with the back of her hand, trying to erase the evidence of vulnerability. I'm fine. Sorry, I didn't mean to. You didn't do anything. Lucas stood at a respectful distance, giving her space, giving her the choice to send him away if that's what she needed. Is there someone I can call for you? There's no one. The words came out before she could stop them. Raw, honest, the kind of truth that slipped out when defenses were down and there wasn't energy left to maintain the lie that everything was manageable. There never is. The admission hung between them, naked and painful. May I sit? Grace hesitated. Her eyes moved from Lucas to Ranger to Judah, who had stopped whimpering and was now watching the other dog with something that looked like recognition. Finally, she nodded. Lucas slid into the booth Lyle had vacated. Ranger settled beside Judah, and the two dogs exchanged the quiet understanding of creatures who recognized shared purpose. Two shepherds, two protectors, two warriors who'd given everything to keep someone safe and would do it again without hesitation. I'm Lucas. Grace. She managed a weak smile that didn't reach her eyes. And this is Judah. He's loyal. I can see that. He's the only one who is. The words were bitter, not directed at Lucas, directed at a world that had taken and taken and taken until there was almost nothing left. Lucas didn't push. He just waited the way good interrogators waited, not with pressure but with patience, creating space for truth to fill the silence. That was my brother, Grace said finally. Lyle, we used to be close. Before. Before what? Before everything. She shook her head. I'm sorry, you don't need to hear my problems. You're just passing through. Actually, I'm not passing through. I bought land here. 40 acres about 15 miles north. Grace looked at him, really looked for the first time, took in the military posture that couldn't be trained away, the olive field jacket worn soft with age, the flannel shirt underneath, the tactical boots that had walked through the sand and blood and places that turned men into ghosts. You're military. Was, Navy, 14 years, just got out 8 months ago. Why? Lucas glanced at Ranger. The dog's scar was visible in the diner's fluorescent light, a permanent reminder of the day everything had gone wrong. My partner got hurt. We decided it was time to stop asking both of us to keep bleeding. Grace's eyes softened. I understand that more than you know. She paused, deciding something. Then, 3 years ago, truck accident on Highway 93. My husband Ethan was driving. He died on impact. I woke up in the hospital and they told me I'd never walk again. Her hand dropped to Judah's head. The dog leaned into her touch like it was the only thing anchoring him to the earth. Judah was Ethan's dog. He was supposed to be a K9 for the fire department. Ethan was a firefighter. But Judah washed out of certification. Too sensitive to loud noises during the final tests. Too emotionally attached to his handler. She smiled sadly. Ethan said that was exactly why we needed him. Good dog, Lucas said quietly. The best. Grace's voice cracked. That's why Lyle scares me. He knows that hurting Judah would be the same as hurting me. And Lyle's desperate. Desperate people do desperate things. What does he want? The house, the property my parents left me. They gave it to me because I was the one who took care of them when they got sick. Lyle got cash. He burned through it in 6 months on some business venture that went nowhere. Her hands twisted in her lap. Now he owes people money. Bad people. He thinks if he can sell the property, he can make it all disappear. And if I won't sell, then he keeps coming, keeps threatening, keeps pushing. Yes, her voice dropped to a whisper, and I don't know how much longer I can hold on. Lucas looked at this woman he'd known for 20 minutes, at her dog gray and old but still willing to fight for her, at the bruise already forming on her wrist where her own brother had grabbed her. Where are you staying tonight? The farmhouse, about 20 minutes outside town. Alone? Judah will be with me. That's not what I asked. Grace met his eyes. Mr. Garrett. Lucas? Lucas, I appreciate your concern, I do, but this isn't your problem. You're just a stranger who's... She stopped. You just got here. Strangers don't have history, Lucas said quietly. Sometimes that makes them the only ones who can help. What are you saying? I'm saying I need a place to stay while I figure out the land situation. I'm saying you probably have a barn that's warmer than the back of my truck. And I'm saying your brother mentioned coming by tonight. He leaned forward slightly. You shouldn't be alone when he does. You do that, stay at a stranger's house. In the barn with my dog. Far enough away to be appropriate, close enough to hear if something happens. Lucas held her gaze. Your brother is coming tonight. You shouldn't face that alone. Why would you do this? You don't know me. Lucas thought about his mother's funeral, the one he'd missed because he was deployed. About the years he'd stayed away because facing home hurt more than facing combat. About Cole and Martinez and the weight of decisions that couldn't be unmade. Because I've spent 14 years fighting enemies who wore different uniforms. And I'm tired of watching the ones wearing familiar faces win. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Under the table, Judah had settled beside Ranger. The two dogs resting against each other with easy companionship, the way soldiers did, when they recognized that the person beside them had been through the fire and come out scarred but standing. One night, she said finally, just to be safe. One night. But even as Lucas said the words, something told him one night would become more because men like Lyle didn't stop until they got what they wanted or something made them stop. And Lucas Garrett had spent his entire career being the thing that made men stop. The drive to the farmhouse took 20 minutes through roads that were more snow than asphalt. Lucas followed Grace's adapted van in his F-150 Ranger Alert in the passenger seat, watching the darkness with trained attention. The headlights carved tunnels through falling snow, revealing glimpses of forest and frozen fields in the kind of isolation that could be peaceful or suffocating, depending on what you were trying to escape. The farmhouse appeared like a ghost from another era. 2 stories. Wraparound porch sagging slightly on the north corner. White paint peeling in long strips like skin after a sunburn. The kind of place that had sheltered generations before this one, that held memories in its walls the way old houses did, births and deaths and arguments and reconciliations all layered together until the building itself felt alive with history. Christmas lights lined the eaves, but their cheerfulness felt fragile against the pressing night, like someone had tried to make the place feel like home and given up halfway through. Grace was already transferring from her van to her wheelchair when Lucas parked. Judah supervised the process with patient vigilance, circling her chair once she was settled, checking that everything was secure, that she was safe. "The barn is around back," Grace said, her breath fogging in the cold. "It's not fancy, but there's a space heater and some old blankets. Should be warm enough. I've slept in worse." "I don't doubt it." She hesitated. Would you like some coffee before you settle in? It's the least I can do." Lucas knew he should refuse, should maintain distance, should remember that this was temporary, that he'd bought his own land, that getting involved in someone else's problems was exactly what he'd come here to avoid. Instead, he said, "Coffee sounds good." The inside of the farmhouse was warm and cluttered with the accumulated memories of a family that no longer existed in its original form. Photos lined the walls in mismatched frames. An older couple who must have been Grace's parents, their faces weathered by years of Montana winters and summers. A younger Grace standing on 2 functional legs, smiling at a camera like the future was something to look forward to. A man with kind eyes and a firefighter's uniform who could only be Ethan. And in every picture with Ethan, the same German shepherd. Judah younger and stronger, but with the same devoted eyes. "He was a firefighter," Grace said, noticing Lucas's attention. "That's how we got Judah. He was supposed to be a K9 unit dog, but he washed out of the final certification. Too gentle during the aggression tests, they said." She smiled sadly. "Ethan said that was exactly why we needed him. Because we didn't need a fighter. We needed a protector." Lucas followed her into the kitchen. Judah positioned himself by the door facing outward, still on duty even in his own home. "The accident was 3 years ago next month," Grace continued, filling a coffee pot with hands that had learned to compensate for limited mobility. "Ethan died instantly. I was in surgery for 18 hours. When I woke up, they told me I'd never walk again. They told me Ethan was gone." She moved toward the small kitchen table, Judah following. "They told me Judah had been howling outside the hospital every night since they brought me in. The nurses finally snuck him up the service elevator. He wouldn't eat until he saw me. Wouldn't sleep. Just cried." Her voice softened, became something fragile and strong at the same time. "He's the reason I survived. Not the doctors, not the therapy. Him. Because if I gave up, who would take care of him?" Lucas understood more than he could explain. He'd felt the same thing when Ranger was wounded, when the shrapnel tore through the dog's ear, and Lucas had carried him 3 miles through hostile territory, refusing to leave him behind, refusing to accept that sometimes the mission meant sacrificing the partner. Grace poured 2 cups of coffee and set them on the table. She looked at Lucas with eyes that had seen too much loss too young. "Thank you," she said, "for staying, even if it's just one night. Thank you for trusting me." The moment stretched. Something unspoken passed between them. Not romance, Lucas was too broken for that, and Grace was too recent in her grief. But recognition, maybe. 2 people who'd been shattered in different ways finding themselves in the same room, discovering that sometimes the pieces fit together just by being present. Then headlights swept across the kitchen window. Judah's head snapped up. A growl built in his throat, low and serious. Grace's face went pale. "He's here." Lucas set down his coffee. "Stay inside. Lock the door behind me." "Lucas, stay inside. I'm." He moved toward the front door. Ranger fell into step beside him, the dog's posture changing in an instant. No longer relaxed, now coiled and ready. The transformation from companion to weapon happened in the space between heartbeats. Lucas opened the door and stepped onto the porch. Lyle Sullivan stood in the driveway, silhouetted by his car's headlights. He wasn't alone. A woman stood beside him. Early 30s, Blonde hair pulled back in a style that suggested professional competence, eyes calculating even from a distance, measuring and assessing and deciding what everything was worth. You again? Lyle's voice was sharp with surprise and something else, fear maybe, or anger that someone had interfered with what should have been simple intimidation. What are you doing here? I could ask you the same thing. This is family business. My family. My business. Looked more like harassment to me. Lyle's face darkened. Who the hell do you think you are? Just someone who doesn't like watching people get pushed around. The woman touched Lyle's arm. Honey, we don't need trouble. Let's just talk to Grace. Grace isn't taking visitors, Lucas said. His voice was flat, conversational. The tone of someone who'd had this type of conversation before and knew exactly how it would end. Especially not ones who grab her hard enough to leave bruises. Lyle's eyes flickered with guilty recognition. That was a misunderstanding. Was it because from where I sat it looked pretty clear? Listen, soldier boy. SEAL, not soldier. There's a difference. Lucas stepped forward slightly, just enough to establish space, just enough to make it clear that the porch was his territory now, and anyone who wanted to argue about it would have to go through him first. The woman she had to be Simone Lyle's wife pulled him back. We'll come back tomorrow when things are calmer. Don't come back at all, Lucas said. Grace doesn't want to see you. Grace doesn't get to decide that. She's my sister. She's a grown woman. She gets to decide whatever she wants. Lyle lunged forward, finger jabbing toward Lucas's chest. You don't know anything about this family. You don't know what she owes. You don't know. Ranger's bark cut through the night like a gunshot. Lyle stumbled backward, nearly falling into the snow. The German shepherd stood at Lucas's side, teeth bared, every muscle rigid with controlled aggression. Not attacking, not yet, but making very clear what would happen if the threat continued. Your dog is insane, Lyle breathed. My dog is trained. There's a difference. And right now he's reading your body language and deciding whether you're a threat. Lucas's voice remained calm. I'd recommend convincing him you're not. Simone pulled Lyle toward the car. Let's go. This isn't worth it. This isn't over, Lyle hissed. That house belongs to me, one way or another. Drive safe, Lucas said. Roads are icy. He watched them leave, watched the taillights disappear into the falling snow. Then he turned and walked back inside. Grace sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around her coffee cup, tears streaming down her face. He'll be back, she whispered. He always comes back. Lucas sat down across from her. Ranger and Judah positioned themselves on either side of her chair, a wall of fur and loyalty, and the absolute refusal to let anyone hurt this person they'd chosen to protect. I know, Lucas said. That's why I'm staying. You said one night. I lied. Grace looked at him. Why do you care? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Lucas thought about all the people he hadn't saved, the teammates who'd died because of his decisions, the missions that haunted his sleep and turned every quiet moment into an opportunity for guilt to crawl back in. Because I've spent my whole life fighting for strangers in countries I couldn't find on a map before deployment, and it never once occurred to me that the people who needed help most might be right here, might be invisible, might be waiting for someone to notice. He met her eyes. I noticed. Grace's tears fell harder now. Not fear this time, something else. Something that might have been hope starting to believe it was allowed to exist. What do? We document everything. We build a case. We make sure the next time your brother crosses a line, there's proof he can't talk his way out of. And if that doesn't work, Lucas looked at Ranger, then at Judah, two dogs who'd found each other across a crowded diner. Two warriors who'd served different masters but understood the same truth that some things were worth protecting regardless of the cost. Then we find another way. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, two strangers and two dogs began to form something none of them had expected. Not a plan, not yet. Just the first fragile threads of trust and the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they wouldn't face it alone. Lucas woke at dawn from dreams of Syria and burning vehicles and the sound of Cole screaming his name. Ranger was already awake, watching him from the barn doorway with the patient understanding of a creature who'd seen his partner through worse nightmares than this. I'm good, boy. The dog's tail moved once, not quite agreement, just acknowledgement. Lucas pulled on his boots and stepped out into morning cold, sharp enough to burn his lungs. The farmhouse stood silent in the gray light, smoke rising from the chimney, where Grace had already started a fire. Behind the house, the forest pressed close, dense with pine and secrets. Something caught his eye, a trail through the snow. Not human, not animal, Something dragged, like wheels had passed through recently cutting twin lines through the fresh powder. Lucas followed the tracks into the tree line. Ranger fell into step beside him, alert but not alarmed. Whatever had made these tracks wasn't a threat, just a curiosity. 50 yards into the woods, the tracks stopped, and there, half hidden by pine branches and decades of neglect, sat an old railroad car. Not a building, a vehicle. An actual rail car from the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, rusted and covered in moss, sitting in the middle of Montana wilderness, where no tracks had existed for half a century. Lucas approached slowly, his training, making him cautious even when logic said there was no threat. The door hung partially open, metal warped with age and weather. He pulled it wider, the hinges screaming in protest. Inside was a time capsule, a wooden desk, an oil lamp. Papers scattered across the surface, yellowed with age but protected from the elements by the metal shell of the car. And on the walls, maps, geological surveys, land plots, all centered on one location, Grace's farmhouse. Lucas picked up the nearest document. The letterhead read Apex Mining Company, dated October 1987. A report on uranium deposits in the Millbrook area. Handwritten notes in the margins, increasingly frantic, increasingly angry. They know. Morrison knows. Brennan knows. They're covering it up. 400% over EPA limits. This will kill people. This is killing people. I'm taking the evidence. If I don't make it, the rail car is at coordinates 47.2, 186 minus 112.4, 397. At the bottom of the page, a signature, Dr. Samuel Grant, geologist. Lucas kept reading. More reports, more evidence. Soil samples showing uranium contamination spreading from old mining sites directly beneath residential properties, including the Sullivan Farm. Water table analysis showing slow poisoning of wells across 3 square miles. Projections of cancer rates, projected deaths, and a list of names. People who'd gotten sick, people who'd died. People whose deaths had been attributed to natural causes, or bad luck, or God's will, when the real cause had been buried under paperwork and payoffs, and the kind of corruption that happened when money meant more than lives. Ethan Sullivan's name was on that list, not as someone who'd died yet, but as someone who'd called the state environmental office 2 weeks before his death, someone who'd reported strange coloration in his well water, someone who'd asked questions that made powerful people nervous. Lucas felt ice settle in his chest. He photographed everything, every document, every map, every piece of evidence that Dr. Grant had hidden in this rail car 37 years ago, evidence that had waited like a time bomb for someone to find it. Then he saw the letter. It was sealed in plastic, addressed to whoever finds this. Lucas opened it carefully. If you're reading this, I'm dead. They won't let me testify. Sheriff Morrison has made that clear. Dalton Brennan has made it clearer. I came to Millbrook as a geologist for Apex Mining in 1985. What I found was genocide in slow motion. Uranium deposits improperly mined waste dumped in areas that feed groundwater for 2,000 people. When I reported it, I was told to keep quiet. When I persisted, I was threatened. When I refused, they made me disappear. This railcar contains evidence of everything: soil samples, water analysis, financial records showing payoffs to local officials. If you have honor, if you have courage, take this to the FBI, not the sheriff, not the state police. The FBI, tell them Apex Mining poisoned Millbrook. Tell them people are dying. Tell them more will die unless someone stops it. If you found this because your dog led you here, pay attention. That's how God speaks sometimes, through the things that are loyal when everything else fails. Don't ignore it. Samuel Grant, October 15th, 1988. Lucas stood in the rail car for a long time holding a letter from a dead man who'd tried to do the right thing and been killed for it. Then he took everything, every piece of evidence, every sample, every map. Grace needed to see this because her husband hadn't died in a random accident. He died because he'd asked questions, the same questions that had gotten Dr. Grant killed 37 years earlier. And the people responsible were still here, still in power, still poisoning the ground. Not anymore. Grace was drinking coffee at the kitchen table when Lucas returned. She looked up as he entered, carrying a cardboard box filled with yellow documents and plastic-wrapped evidence. What's that? The reason your husband is dead. Her cup stopped halfway to her lips. What? Lucas set the box on the table. There's a rail car in the woods behind your house. It's been there since 1988. A geologist named Samuel Grant hid evidence there before he was killed. Evidence that Apex Mining Company was poisoning the groundwater with uranium runoff. Evidence that people were dying because of it. Grace's face had gone pale. I don't understand. Ethan called the environmental office 2 weeks before he died. He reported strange water in your well. He asked questions. Lucas pulled out the list of names. He's on this list. People who noticed, people who asked questions, people who became problems. You're saying Ethan's accident wasn't an accident. I'm saying I need to make some calls. I'm saying we need to find out exactly what happened to your husband's truck that day. Lucas met her eyes. I'm saying I don't believe in coincidences anymore. Grace sat motionless, processing information that was reshaping her entire understanding of the last 3 years. If what you're saying is true, if Ethan was murdered, then Lyle might not have known. Or he might have. Either way, he's connected to people who did. Lucas pulled out his phone and dialed Jake. Garrett, it's early. I need you to look into a traffic accident. 3 years ago. Highway 93 outside Millbrook, Montana. Victim was Ethan Sullivan, firefighter. Official report said brake failure. You think it wasn't? I think a man asked questions about environmental poisoning and died 2 weeks later. I think his widow is being pressured to sell property that sits on top of a contaminated mine site. And I think the people doing the pressuring have connections to organized crime and a mining company that buried evidence of mass poisoning. Silence on the line. Then, Jesus Garrett, you don't do anything small, do you? Can you help or not? I'll pull the accident report. If there was anything suspicious, I'll find it. Jake paused. This is the woman from yesterday, the one with the brother problem. Yeah, you're getting attached. I'm doing my job. You don't have a job anymore. You retired, remember? Lucas looked at Grace at the dawning horror on her face as she read through documents that proved her husband had died for nothing more than caring about clean water. I'm doing what needs doing. Fair enough, I'll call you back in an hour. Lucas ended the call and found Grace staring at a photograph from the box. A group shot, men in hard hats standing in front of mining equipment. One of them was younger but recognizable. Same cold eyes, same calculating expression. I know this man, Grace whispered. He's not young anymore, but I've seen him. He's on the town council. Dalton Brennan. He gives speeches about community development. He was CEO of Apex Mining in 1987. According to these documents, he ordered the illegal dumping. He paid off the sheriff to cover it up. And when Dr. Grant tried to expose him, he had him killed. And he's still here, still in power. Not for long. Grace looked up at Lucas with something new in her eyes. Not just fear or grief, anger. The kind of cold, focused anger that came from discovering that everything you'd thought was true was actually a lie built on murder and greed. What do? We gather more evidence. We connect Lyle to Brennan. We prove that what happened to Ethan wasn't an accident. Lucas sat down across from her. And we make sure that when we move, we have enough to take down everyone involved. Not just your brother, all of them. How? By being smart, by being patient, and by not letting them know what we found until it's too late for them to run. Judah rose from his spot by the door and walked to Lucas, pressing his gray muzzle against Lucas's hand. The old dog looked up at him with eyes that seemed to say, I brought her here for a reason. Don't let her down. Lucas scratched behind the dog's ears. We won't. Jake's call came exactly 1 hour later. The accident was definitely not an accident. Lucas put the phone on speaker so Grace could hear. How do you know? Because I pulled the mechanic's report from the tow company that handled the wreck. Brake lines were cut, not worn, not corroded, cut. Clean incision with the blade probably during the night before the accident. Jake's voice was grim. Someone knew exactly what they were doing, knew that Highway 93 has that steep grade coming down from Mineral Ridge, knew that without brakes, any vehicle would lose control right about mile marker 47. Grace made a sound like she'd been punched. There's more, Jake continued. The investigating officer was Sheriff Dan Morrison, same sheriff mentioned in Dr. Grant's documents. He ruled it accidental brake failure. Never ordered a forensic analysis. Case closed within 24 hours. Who benefits from Ethan's death? Lucas asked. That's where it gets interesting. Ethan had a life insurance policy. $500,000. Beneficiary was Grace Sullivan. But guess who handled the probate? Simone Reed, paralegal at Brennan Legal Services. She processed the claim, but according to financial records I dug up, only $200,000 went to Grace. The rest went to an account controlled by Simone herself. Grace's hands were shaking. She stole from me, from Ethan's death. She killed him, Lucas said quietly, or hired someone to. Then she married your brother and started a long game to get the property. The property that sits on top of contaminated land that would be worthless if anyone knew the truth. Why would she want worthless land? Because it's not worthless if the contamination stays hidden. According to these mining reports, there's still $60 million in extractable uranium beneath your property. Uranium that can't be touched legally because of EPA regulations. But if Brennan can buy the land quietly through intermediaries, he can extract it illegally and sell it on the black market. Jake's voice came through the speaker. I'm sending this to Agent Patricia Brenner at the FBI. She's going to want to talk to both of you. This is federal now. Murder, fraud, environmental crimes, corruption of public officials. How long until she can move? Lucas asked. 48 hours minimum. She needs to build a case, get warrants, coordinate with state authorities who aren't compromised. Can you keep Grace safe that long? Lucas looked at the woman across from him, at the devastation in her eyes as her entire world rearranged itself into something darker and more dangerous than she'd imagined. Yeah, we'll be safe. Good. And Garrett, watch your back. If Brennan thinks you know something, he won't hesitate to clean up loose ends. He's already killed at least twice. 3 times won't bother him. The call ended. Grace sat motionless, staring at nothing. 3 years. 3 years I thought I survived, and Ethan didn't because of bad luck. Because of a drunk driver or mechanical failure or just randomness. It wasn't your fault, but it was purposeful. Someone looked at my husband and decided he was worth less than money, worth less than covering up crimes, worth less than silence. She looked at Lucas. My brother's wife killed Ethan, and my brother, he might not have known. We can't assume. Can't we? He's desperate to sell the property. He's been pressuring me for months. He grabbed me yesterday in front of everyone. Grace's voice hardened. Even if he didn't know about Ethan, he knows now, and he's still trying to force me out. Lucas couldn't argue with that logic. We need to be ready for anything, he said. Lyle's deadline with Victor Kane is January 1st, 5 days away. When desperate people run out of time, they make mistakes. Those mistakes tend to be violent. What do we do until the FBI gets here? We prepare, we document, and we wait for them to make their move. You think they'll come here? I think they have to. If Brennan suspects we found Miss Railcar, if he thinks we know about the contamination, we become the biggest threat to everything he's built. Lucas stood. I'm going to install more cameras, more sensors. We're going to turn this property into a fortress. And if they come anyway, Lucas looked at Ranger, then at Judah, 2 dogs who'd already proven they'd die protecting the people they loved. Then we make them regret it. The day passed in tense preparation. Lucas worked with military precision, fortifying the farmhouse like he was preparing for siege. Motion sensors at every approach, cameras covering every angle, tripwires in the tree line, emergency escape routes mapped and rehearsed. Grace watched him work, seeing for the first time what 14 years in the Navy had actually meant. This wasn't just a man who knew how to fight. This was someone who knew how to think 3 moves ahead, who could transform any space into a tactical advantage, who carried readiness in his bones the way other people carried anxiety. You've done this before, she said. Different context, same principles. Will it be enough? Lucas paused in his work. Honestly, if they come with enough people, no amount of preparation is enough. But we're not trying to win a war. We're just trying to survive long enough for the cavalry to arrive. That's not reassuring. It's realistic. He met her eyes. I won't lie to you, Grace. If Brennan sends professionals, if he decides this property is worth killing for, it's going to get bad. But I will do everything in my power to make sure you come out of it live. That's a promise. What about you? I'm harder to kill than I look. Grace wheeled closer. That's not an answer. Lucas didn't have a better one to give her. He'd spent 14 years in situations where the probability of dying was high, and the only thing that kept you alive was being slightly better, slightly luckier, slightly more prepared than the enemy. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes it wasn't. Colin Martinez proved that, but he couldn't tell Grace that her survival might depend on him dying first. Couldn't tell her that he'd already made the calculation in his head, already decided that if it came down to him or her, there was no choice at all. So instead he said, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we both survive. It was the best he could offer. From the look in her eyes, she knew it. Marlene Kowalski arrived just after noon, her old pickup truck rattling into the driveway with the sound of a vehicle held together by determination and baling wire. She emerged carrying another casserole and wearing an expression that Lucas had learned to recognize, the look of someone who'd seen something that worried them and couldn't stay silent about it. Grace, honey, Mr. Garrett. She handed over the dish without preamble. We need to talk. They settled in the kitchen. Judah took up his position by the door. Ranger lay beneath the table, but his eyes never stopped moving, tracking every sound, every movement. I was at the general store this morning, Marlene began. Lyle was there. So was Simone. They were buying supplies. Lucas straightened. What kind of supplies? Rope, duct tape, 5-gallon gas cans, lots of them. Marlene's weathered face was tight with worry. The clerk, Jenny Morris, she called me because she thought it was strange. Lyle told her he was doing some work up at his cabin, getting ready for ice fishing season. Lyle doesn't have a cabin, Grace said. No, he doesn't. Never has. Marlene looked between them. I don't know what he's planning, but it's nothing good. Men don't buy that much gasoline unless they're planning to burn something big. Lucas felt the pieces falling into place. He's going to destroy the evidence. The rail car, maybe the farmhouse. Make it look like an accident. When us out, Grace's voice was tight. Soon, before the FBI can move, before we can expose what really happened to Ethan. Lucas pulled out his phone. I need to call Agent Brenner. Move up the timeline. He stepped outside to make the call, leaving Grace with Marlene. Honey, Marlene said quietly, I don't know what's happening here, but I've lived in Millbrook for 72 years. I've seen Brennan work. I've seen Morrison look the other way. And I've seen what happens to people who ask too many questions. What happens? They leave, or they die, or they learn to keep their heads down. Marlene gripped Grace's hand. Your parents were good people. They asked questions about why so many folks in this area got sick. Cancer clusters, respiratory diseases. They started making noise about testing the water. Grace felt ice in her stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying they both died of cancer within 6 months of each other. And I'm saying it wasn't until after they were gone that I realized maybe it wasn't just bad luck. You think, Brennan, bad things happen to people who threaten bad men's profits. Marlene's eyes were fierce. But you've got something your parents didn't. You've got that soldier. And I've seen the way he looks at you, the way he's fortifying this place like he's preparing for war. That man won't let them take you without a fight. He shouldn't have to fight at all. This isn't his battle. Honey, men like that don't see it that way. They see something worth protecting, and they protect it. Simple as that. Marlene stood. I'm going to tell some friends about this, quietly. People who remember your parents. People who've lost family to cancers that shouldn't happen to folks who never smoked a day in their lives. If Lyle and Brennan come for you, they're going to find this old woman and a few others standing in their way. Marlene, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering. She smiled, and for a moment Grace could see the young woman she'd been fierce and unbreakable. Besides, I'm 72. What are they going to do, kill me? I've had a good run. Lucas came back inside, his face grim. Agent Brenner can't move until tomorrow afternoon. She's coordinating with state police who aren't connected to Morrison, but it takes time. We're on our own until then. How long is until then? 30 hours, maybe less if they expedite. Marlene nodded like this confirmed something she'd suspected. Then I'm staying. I'll sleep on the couch. Extra eyes, extra ears. Ma'am, I appreciate it, but if this goes bad, then I'm exactly where I want to be, fighting alongside people who deserve better than what this town has given them. Marlene's jaw set in a way that suggested arguing would be pointless. My grandson Caleb is coming too. He's 17, big for his age, and he knows how to handle himself. Marlene, hush, Grace. It's decided. She looked at Lucas. What do you need us to do? They spent the afternoon preparing. Lucas taught Marlene and her grandson Caleb the escape routes, the safe spots, the signals to use if things went wrong. He distributed cheap walkie-talkies bought from the general store, establishing communication protocols. Caleb was indeed big for 17, 6'2", and built like someone who'd spent his life hauling hay and fixing fences. He looked at Lucas with the kind of awe that young men reserve for warriors they hope to become. You were really a SEAL, Caleb asked. Was. That's so cool. Did you kill terrorists and stuff? I did my job. Lucas's tone made it clear the conversation was over. Caleb wisely changed the subject. My grandma says someone murdered Grace's husband. That true? We believe so. Man, Caleb shook his head. That's messed up. Who kills someone over land? People who care more about money than lives. Are they coming here? The people who did it? Lucas looked at the young man, at the eagerness mixed with fear, at the desire to help, mixed with the very rational terror of someone who'd never faced real violence before. Probably, if they do, your job is to protect your grandmother and Grace. Get them out. Get them to safety. Don't try to be a hero. What about you? I'll handle the rest. By yourself. Lucas looked at Ranger lying in a patch of afternoon sunlight, completely relaxed but ready to explode into action at a moment's notice. Not by myself. Night fell like a curtain dropping on a stage. Lucas positioned himself in the living room with all the lights off, eyes adjusted to darkness, ears tuned to the silence that filled the spaces between wind and creaking wood. Ranger lay at his feet. Judah was with Grace in her bedroom down the hall. Marlene and Caleb slept upstairs, as ready as civilians could be for violence that might never come. Lucas had spent enough time in combat to know the difference between the silence before an attack and the silence of a quiet night. This was the former. The air felt wrong. Too still. Too heavy. Like the whole world was holding its breath. At 11:47, the first sensor triggered. Lucas's phone buzzed silently. North perimeter. Movement. Multiple contacts. He keyed the walkie-talkie. Grace, wake up. They're here. Her voice came back steady despite what she must be feeling. I'm ready. Marlene, awake. Caleb's with me. Stay upstairs until I give the all clear or tell you to run. Do not come down. Understood. Lucas moved to the window. Through the falling snow, he could see them. Black shapes against white ground. Moving with the confidence of people who'd done this before, but not the discipline of professionals. He counted. 8, 9, 10, no 12. More than he'd hoped for. Fewer than he'd feared. The lead figure was immediately recognizable, even in darkness. Lyle, moving with the jerky desperation of someone who'd run out of options and time. Behind him, Simone, directing, orchestrating, the brain behind the muscle. And behind them all, hanging back near the vehicles, a figure Lucas didn't recognize. Older, expensive coat. The kind of man who gave orders and expected them to be followed. Dalton Brennan. Come to watch his problems get erased. Lucas keyed the radio. Grace, I need you to record this, everything that happens. The cameras will get most of it, but I need audio too. Can you do that? Yes. Good. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you keep recording. That recording is the evidence that takes these people down. Understand? I understand. Good girl. The attackers split into groups. 4 toward the front door, 4 around back. 2 toward the barn, probably planning to set it on fire first. Create confusion. Drive everyone out into the open. Standard terror tactics, designed to work on people who panicked. Lucas had stopped panicking in combat zones a decade ago. He let them reach the doors. Let them think they had surprise on their side. Let them bunch up the way amateurs always did, seeking comfort in numbers rather than tactical spacing. Then he sent Ranger out the back. The dog moved like a shadow, fast and silent, hitting the first man before anyone realized they were under attack. 80 pounds of military-trained German Shepherd drove the attacker into the snow with enough force to crack ribs. The man's screams shattered the silence. The others spun confused, trying to figure out what had hit them. Ranger was already moving to the next target. Not killing. Lucas had trained him better than that. Just incapacitating, hamstringing, creating chaos. While they focused on the dog, Lucas went out the front. He hit the first 2 attackers before they knew he was there. Quick strikes, efficient, dropping them without permanent damage, but with enough force that they wouldn't be getting up soon. The third man swung something, a bat or a pipe. Lucas caught it mid-swing, twisted, felt the wrist break, and the weapon clattered to the porch. 4 down, someone shouted. There's only one of him, get him! 3 men rushed Lucas at once. This was what he'd trained for, what 14 years of close-quarters combat had prepared him to do. He moved through them like water through stones, using their momentum against them, never staying in one place long enough to be a target, always moving, always one step ahead of where they expected him to be. One man went down with a knee to the solar plexus, another with an elbow to the temple. The third tried to grapple and found himself flipped over Lucas's hip onto the frozen ground, hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. 7 down. Gunshots split the night. Lucas dove behind a woodpile as bullets chewed into the logs, sending splinters flying. So much for non-lethal engagement. Cease fire. Simone's voice cut through the chaos. We need her alive, you idiots, alive. The shooting stopped. Lucas used the pause to reposition, moving through shadows to where Ranger had pinned another attacker in the snow, teeth locked on the man's forearm, with the kind of pressure that made bones creak. 8 down. Grace Sullivan, Simone's voice rang out across the property. We know you're in there. We know you found the rail car. We know what you think you know. Silence from the house. But here's what you don't know. That evidence, it's not enough. Samuel Grant was a drunk and a conspiracy theorist. No one will believe him. No one will care. More silence. However, if you sign the property over right now, we'll forget all this happened. We'll forget you interfered. We'll even throw in an extra 100,000 for your trouble. You can leave Millbrook. Start over somewhere else. Somewhere warm. Somewhere accessible. Simone's voice took on a false warmth. Think about it, Grace. No more Montana winters. No more struggling with that old house. No more being alone. From inside the house, Grace's voice rang out strong and clear. I'm not alone, and I'm not signing anything. Lucas felt something warm bloom in his chest, pride maybe, or just recognition that he'd been right about this woman from the start. Simone's mask of civility cracked. Then you've made your choice. Burn it. Burn it all. Two men moved toward the house with gas cans. Lucas stepped out of the shadows. I don't think so. They turned, saw him, saw Ranger at his side, blood on the dog's muzzle from the men who thought they could hurt what he protected. Just walk away, Lucas said quietly. You've already lost. The FBI is coming. Everything you've done, everything Brennan ordered, it's all documented now. It's over. It's not over until we say it's over. Simone raised her gun, pointing it directly at Lucas. You should have minded your own business, soldier. Seal, there's a difference. Then several things happened at once. Headlights swept across the property. Multiple vehicles. Federal vehicles. Sirens wailing. The FBI had arrived early. Simone's face went white. No, not yet. You said, I lied about the timeline, Lucas said. Figured you might try something if you thought you had time. Agent Patricia Brenner emerged from the lead vehicle, flanked by a dozen federal agents in tactical gear. Simone Reed Sullivan, Dalton Brennan, you're under arrest for murder conspiracy, environmental crimes fraud, and about 15 other charges I'll add once I've read through all the evidence. Simone turned to run. Ranger cut her off, not attacking, just blocking, showing teeth, making it clear that running wasn't an option. She dropped her gun and raised her hands. Brennan tried to get back to his vehicle. Federal agents were already there, pulling him out, putting him in handcuffs while he sputtered about lawyers and rights and persecution. Lyle just stood there in the snow crying, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about Ethan. Not until after. Simone told me it was an accident. She said, tell it to the judge, Brenner said. She walked over to Lucas. Nice work. Reckless, dangerous, completely against my advice. But nice work. They forced my hand. They usually do. She looked at the farmhouse. Your friend in there, yeah. She's going to need to give a statement. Probably several statements. This is going to be a long investigation. She'll cooperate. And you? Lucas looked at the house, at the warm light spilling from the windows, at the place that had stopped feeling like a temporary refuge and started feeling like something else. I'll be here as long as she needs me. Brenner smiled. Somehow I don't think that's going to be a problem. 3 days later, the full scope of what had been hidden began to emerge. Dr. Grant's evidence was just the beginning. Modern soil testing confirmed uranium contamination across 5 square miles. Water table analysis showed poisoning spreading toward town wells. Medical records, once properly analyzed, showed cancer rates in Millbrook 40% higher than state average. And financial records pulled from Brennan's office showed a conspiracy that went back decades. Payoffs to Sheriff Morrison, bribes to state inspectors, hush money to families who'd lost loved ones too quickly to unusual cancers. The town of Millbrook erupted into chaos and outrage. Morrison resigned before he could be arrested. The town council dissolved in disgrace. And Dalton Brennan, who'd given speeches about community and progress and Montana values, sat in a federal detention facility awaiting trial for crimes that would put him away for life. Grace's property was deemed uninhabitable due to contamination. But the federal government's buyout offer was generous, more than generous enough that she could buy anywhere she wanted, start over anywhere she chose. She chose to stay in Millbrook. This is my home, she told Lucas as they sat on what was left of the farmhouse porch. My parents died here. Ethan died for this place. I'm not letting Brennan drive me away from the only home I've ever known. The contamination. The EPA says it can be remediated. It'll take years, but it can be cleaned. They're already starting the process. She looked at him. I'm going to use the buyout money to fund it, turn the farmhouse into a recovery center, a place for people who've been hurt by corporate greed, by systems that failed them, by the kind of evil that wears a suit and hides behind law firms and shell companies. That's ambitious. I learned it from a Navy SEAL that sometimes the best thing you can do is stay and fight. She smiled. I'm staying. I'm fighting. And I'm going to make sure what happened to my family, to Dr. Grant, to all those people who died without knowing why, never happens again. Lucas looked at this woman who'd been broken and put herself back together stronger, who'd lost everything and decided to build something from the ashes. You'll need help. Is that an offer? It's a statement of fact. You'll need security, site management, someone who knows how to deal with federal agencies and contractors and all the bureaucracy that comes with a project this size. And you know someone? I might. Lucas met her eyes. Depends on whether there's a place for a former SEAL who's tired of running and ready to build something that matters. Grace reached out and took his hand. I think I can find a place. They sat in comfortable silence watching the EPA crews work in the distance, turning poison into possibility. Ranger and Judah lay at their feet, two old warriors, finally at rest. 6 months later, the Sullivan Recovery Center opened its doors. The farmhouse had been completely rebuilt, decontaminated, transformed. Where there had been isolation and fear, now there were warm rooms filled with people who understood what it meant to lose everything and find the strength to start again. Veterans dealing with PTSD, families displaced by corporate malfeasance, whistleblowers who'd lost jobs and homes for telling the truth. They all found refuge here, found community, found proof that broken things could be mended if someone cared enough to do the work. Lucas stood on the new porch, watching the sun set over land that was slowly healing. Judah lay at his feet, grayer now, moving slower but still devoted to the mission of protecting Grace even as his body began to fail. Ranger was in the field with some of the residents running what looked like play, but was really therapy, teaching people who'd forgotten how to trust that some things could still be counted on. Grace wheeled out onto the porch, coffee in hand, and positioned herself beside Lucas. They'd developed a comfortable rhythm over the months. Morning security briefings, afternoon administrative work, evening silence on this porch, watching the light fade and the first stars appear. Marlene brought pie, Grace said. Claims we're all too skinny. We're not skinny. I told her that. She glared at me until I agreed to eat 2 slices. Lucas smiled. Marlene's hard to argue with. Most terrifying 72-year-old woman I've ever met. They sat in companionable silence. Judah's breathing was deep and steady, the sleep of a dog who'd finally accepted that the threat was over. I got a call from Agent Brenner today, Grace said. Yeah, Brennan's trial starts next week. They're expecting life without parole. Multiple counts of murder, environmental terrorism, corruption. The list goes on. Good. Simone took a plea, 25 years. She's testifying against everyone involved. Kane's organization, the mining company executives, even some state officials who knew and looked the way. Grace's voice was carefully neutral. And Lyle, he took a deal too. 15 years for conspiracy and fraud. He's giving up everything he knows. How do you feel about that? I don't know. Grace stared out at the sunset. Part of me still remembers the brother who taught me to ride a bike. Part of me knows that person doesn't exist anymore. Maybe never did. Lucas didn't offer platitudes. He'd learned that Grace didn't need reassurance that everything would be okay. She needed someone who understood that sometimes things stayed broken and you just learned to carry the pieces differently. Do you ever regret it? Grace asked suddenly. Staying, building this instead of disappearing into whatever you planned to disappear into. Lucas thought about Cole and Martinez, about the guilt that still lived in his chest like a second heartbeat. It hadn't gone away, probably never would, but it felt different now. Not lighter, just shared maybe, distributed across purpose and community, and the knowledge that every day here meant someone got help who needed it. No, he said, I don't regret it. Good. Grace reached out and took his hand, lacing their fingers together with the deliberate certainty that had defined everything she'd done since deciding to rebuild. Because I don't think I could have done this without you. You could have. Maybe, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out. The door opened and one of the residents stuck his head out. Young guy, maybe 25, missing his right leg below the knee from an IED in Afghanistan. Grace, we've got a call. Family asking about the program. Mom and 2 kids. Husband blew the whistle on defense contractor fraud. Lost everything. Tell them I'll be right there. She looked at Lucas. Duty calls. Go. I'll be here. I know you will. She wheeled inside, already shifting into the mode of director and advocate, and the voice that told frightened people they'd found a safe harbor. Lucas was left alone with Judah in the sunset in the quiet knowledge that for the first time since Syria, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Judah's tail thumped once against the porch boards. "Yeah, boy, I know, we got lucky." The old dog's eyes opened amber and wise, filled with the understanding that came from years of watching humans struggle and survive and sometimes heal. From inside came the sound of Grace's voice, warm and encouraging, talking to someone who was probably broken and scared and looking for proof that life after trauma could be something more than survival. And Lucas thought about how he'd come to Montana to disappear and instead had found the one thing he'd stopped believing existed. Not redemption. That was too clean, too easy. Cole and Martinez were still dead. That would never change. But purpose, maybe. Connection. The knowledge that the rest of his life could mean something more than running from ghosts. The last light faded from the sky. Judah's breathing deepened into sleep. And somewhere in the backfield, Ranger barked, once sharp and joyful, the sound of a warrior who'd found his pack. On a cold morning in early December, almost exactly 1 year after Lucas first arrived in Millbrook, something changed. Judah didn't get up for breakfast. Grace found him in his bed beside her wheelchair, breathing, but still his old body finally giving out after years of service that had asked more than any dog should give. She called Lucas. He came immediately. They sat with Judah for 3 hours, neither speaking, just being present as the old dog's breathing grew shallower, as his eyes grew dim. At 11:47, with Grace's hand on his head and Lucas's hand on his side, Judah took one last breath and let it out slowly. And then he was gone. Grace didn't cry at first. She just sat there staring at the dog who'd saved her life a dozen times over who'd been the only reason she survived the worst years, who'd loved her when she couldn't love herself. "He waited," Lucas said quietly, "until he knew you were safe, until he knew you didn't need him anymore. I'll always need him. I know, but he did what he came to do. Kept you alive, kept you fighting, made sure you found people who wouldn't leave." Then Grace cried. Not the silent tears of someone who'd learned to grieve alone, but the full racking sobs of someone who'd finally learned it was okay to let others see you break. Lucas held her while she cried. Ranger pressed against both of them, offering the comfort of presence. They buried Judah on a hill overlooking the recovery center, next to a marker for Ethan. 2 protectors, 2 warriors, 2 souls who'd given everything for the people they loved. Grace chose the epitaph herself. Judah failed, K9, perfect guardian, he never quit. For weeks after Grace was quieter than usual, going through the motions of running the center, but with a piece of herself carved out and buried on that hill. Lucas understood. He didn't push. He just stayed close. Made sure she ate. Made sure she slept. Made sure she knew she wasn't alone, even though the companion who'd been her anchor for 9 years was gone. One night, 2 months after Judah's death, Grace found Lucas on the porch. "I want to get another dog," she said. "Okay." Not to replace him. Nothing could replace him. But this place, what we're building, it needs a dog. The residents need that. The unconditional loyalty. The reminder that some things don't abandon you. "What kind of dog?" Grace pulled out her phone and showed him a photo. 2 German Shepherd puppies, 8 weeks old, from a K9 breeder in Wyoming. Brother and sister. Both from working lines. The breeder says they show promise for service work, but they're too sensitive for police or military. Too bonded to each other. Lucas looked at the photo, at 2 small faces that would grow into something strong and loyal and necessary. "What are you going to name them?" Grace's eyes welled with tears, but she was smiling. "I thought, maybe Ethan and Judah. So they're always here, always part of this place." "They'd like that." "You think so?" "I know so." And they brought the puppies home the next week. Ranger met them at the door with the patient dignity of an elder warrior accepting new recruits. He sniffed them thoroughly, assessed their worth, and then lay down and let them climb all over him. Grace laughed for the first time in months, real laughter, the sound of someone remembering that joy could exist alongside grief. And Lucas, watching her play with the puppies while Ranger supervised with patient amusement, felt something in his chest loosen, something that had been clenched tight since Syria began to relax. He'd spent 8 months running from guilt, a year building something that mattered, and finally watching Grace smile while baby Judah chewed on her finger and baby Ethan fell asleep in her lap, he understood what healing actually looked like. Not forgetting, not moving on, not pretending the broken parts didn't exist, just learning to carry them differently, learning to build something strong enough that the weight didn't crush you, learning to accept that maybe possibly you deserve to feel something other than guilt. That night, after Grace had gone to bed and the puppies were asleep in their crate and Ranger had settled on his bed, Lucas walked to the hill where Judah was buried. The marker was simple, stone and metal, built to last. "I kept my promise," Lucas said to the grave. "She's safe. She's building something that matters. She's not alone." The wind whispered through the pine trees. "And I know what you're going to say, that I need to tell her how I feel, that I need to stop pretending this is just about protection and duty and obligation." More wind, like laughter almost. But what if she doesn't feel the same way? What if I'm reading this wrong? What if a sound behind him? Lucas turned. Grace was there in her wheelchair, bundled against the cold. "What if what?" she asked quietly. Lucas froze. "How long have you been there?" "Long enough to hear you having a conversation with my dead dog about your feelings." She wheeled closer. "So, what if what?" Grace sighed. "Because if you're about to say what I think you're about to say, what I've been hoping you'd say for about 6 months now, then you should probably just say it." Lucas looked at her. At this woman who'd survived everything the world could throw at her and come out stronger. Who'd lost her husband, her mobility, her family, her home, and still found the strength to build something beautiful from the ashes. "I love you," he said. Simple, direct, the way seals communicated when there was no room for misunderstanding. Grace's smile could have lit the darkness. "Took you long enough." "I wasn't sure." Lucas Garrett, "You are the smartest, most tactically brilliant, most frustratingly cautious man I've ever met. But when it comes to this, you're an idiot. I, I love you too. I have for months. I just didn't know if you were staying because you wanted to or because you felt obligated." "I'm staying because I can't imagine being anywhere else." "Good." Grace reached out and pulled him down so she could kiss him. "Because I wasn't planning on letting you leave anyway." They stayed on the hill for a long time holding each other while the stars wheeled overhead and the wind whispered through the trees. And if the wind sounded like an old dog's satisfied sigh, like a warrior who'd completed his final mission and could finally rest, neither of them mentioned it. But they both felt it. 5 years later, the Sullivan Recovery Center had expanded to 12 locations across 5 states. More than 2,000 families had found help within its walls. Legislation had been passed. Corporations had been held accountable. Lives had been saved. Grace stood at the podium during the center's anniversary celebration, Lucas beside her looking out at a room filled with people who'd survived the unsurvivable and learned to thrive. 5 years ago, Grace began, "I was alone in a farmhouse waiting to die. My brother wanted my property. My husband had been murdered. I'd given up on everything except my dog." She paused, composing herself. "Then a stranger got off a bus that had broken down, a Navy SEAL who'd come to Montana to disappear, who'd lost teammates in combat and carried guilt that wasn't his to carry, who'd decided that the only way to survive was to never stop moving." Her eyes found Lucas, but he stopped, for one night, then another, then he stayed, not because he was weak, but because he was strong enough to recognize that some things are worth fighting for, that some people are worth saving. That home isn't a place you leave, it's a place you build, together. The room erupted in applause. Lucas squeezed her hand. 5 years of building, 5 years of healing, 5 years of proving that broken things could be mended and broken people could be whole, and sometimes the worst moments of your life led directly to the best. They'd gotten married 2 years ago, small ceremony, just Marlene and a few residents and Agent Brenner who'd become something like a friend. No music, no fanfare, just two people who'd found each other in the dark and decided to walk toward the light together. After the celebration, they stood on the porch of the original farmhouse, now fully remediated and serving as the center's main administrative building. Ranger was gone now, buried on the hill beside Judah and Ethan. Old age had taken him peacefully in his sleep, the way warriors who'd served well deserved to go. But Judah II and Ethan II were there fully grown, now patrolling the grounds with the same devotion their namesakes had shown. "Do you ever think about that night?" Grace asked. "The night you first came to the farmhouse?" "Every day." "What do you think would have happened if you hadn't stayed?" Lucas thought about it, about the timeline where he'd said no, where he'd stayed in the barn for one night and then driven away to whatever empty destination he'd been aiming for. "I think you would have survived. You're stronger than you know." But, but I wouldn't have. I'd still be running, still trying to outrun ghosts that can't be outrun, still convinced that I didn't deserve anything except isolation and guilt. And now I know that sometimes the mission isn't over when you think it is. Sometimes it's just beginning." Grace leaned against him. I'm glad your bus broke down. Me too. And they stood together watching the sunset over land that had been poisoned and healed, over buildings that had been raised from contamination and loss, over a community that had formed from broken pieces and somehow become something stronger than the sum of its parts. Inside, they could hear laughter, residents telling stories, children playing, the sounds of life continuing despite everything that had tried to stop it. Sometimes, Grace said quietly, I think about Dr. Grant, about the letter he left in the rail car, about what he said about God speaking through days and loyalty and the things we almost ignore. Yeah, I think he was right. I think if Judah hadn't led us to that rail car, if Ranger hadn't been trained to notice things that were wrong, if two dogs hadn't recognized each other across a diner and decided their humans needed to meet, none of this would exist. Lucas thought about Ranger refusing to move past certain areas, about Judah pulling Grace toward the woods, about two military dogs who'd communicated in ways that seemed almost supernatural, but were really just the heightened awareness of creatures who'd learned to read a world humans couldn't see. Maybe that's how miracles work, he said. Not lightning bolts, not voices from the sky, just small nudges, loyal companions, the refusal of good things to let us ignore them. Maybe. They went inside as the stars began to appear. Ethan II greeted them at the door, tail wagging, ready to begin the evening patrol. Judah II was already in the common room, letting children pet him, while parents watched with the first real smiles some of them had worn in years. And Lucas thought about a letter from a dead geologist, about a warning that had waited 37 years to be found, about words that said, if you found this because your dog led you here, pay attention. He'd paid attention, and it had saved his life just as surely as it had saved Grace's. That night, after everyone had gone to bed and the center was quiet, Lucas wrote his own letter. He sealed it and put it in the time capsule they were planning to bury on the property. A message for whoever found it, 50 or 100 years from now. If you're reading this, you're probably going through something hard. Maybe you lost someone. Maybe you lost yourself. Maybe you're running from something that won't stop chasing you. I want you to know something. Miracles don't always look like miracles. Sometimes they look like broken buses and wrong turns and dogs that refuse to move when you tell them to. Sometimes they look like strangers who stay when they should leave. Sometimes they look like the hardest choice to make, but the right one anyway. If you have a companion, a dog or a person, or just a quiet voice inside that keeps nudging you towards something you're afraid to face, pay attention to it. That's how God speaks, I think. Through the things that are loyal when everything else fails. Through the moments that seem small until you look back and realize they were everything. Don't ignore it. Don't run from it. Stay, fight, build something that matters. And know that somewhere in the past, you're reading about two broken people and two loyal dogs figured out how to heal. Not by forgetting what hurt them, but by transforming that pain into something that helped others. You can too. Lucas Garrett Sullivan, Recovery Center, Year 5. He sealed the letter and went to bed where Grace was already asleep with one hand resting on the side of the bed where Judah used to sleep. Lucas lay down beside her. Through the window, he could see the hill where three warriors rested. Ethan, Judah, Ranger. Three souls who'd given everything to protect what mattered. And he thought about how he'd come to Montana to disappear and instead had found the only thing that made life worth living. Not redemption. That was still too clean, too simple. Cole and Martinez were still dead. Some wounds never fully healed. But purpose, community, love. The knowledge that the rest of his life would mean something more than running from ghosts. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. Outside, Ethan II barked once, sharp and clear. The sound of a guardian announcing that all was well, that the perimeter was secure, that the people he'd sworn to protect could sleep safely one more night. Lucas closed his eyes, and for the first time in 6 years, he slept without dreams of Syria. Just peace, just warmth, just the quiet knowledge that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, home.